You want to be in the know, right?
Yeah.
Understand what's shaping our world without spending hours sifting through reports and, news feeds. That's exactly what this is for sort of your shortcut to getting the crucial information.
Right.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into the current landscape of homeland security. We're going to focus particularly on some, significant developments right here in Michigan.
Yeah, and these events are really brought into sharp relief by a recently released Department of Homeland Security threat assessment and some, frankly, quite concerning actions by law enforcement.
Okay, so what sources did we look at for this?
We've analyzed the DHS's 2025 Homeland Threat Assessment, examined Department of Justice press releases, looked closely at news coverage, and even explored a Reddit discussion just to get a feel for public sentiment.
Got it.
And our goal, really, is to pull out the vital insights, understand the threats we're facing, see how they're, manifesting in real-world events, and understand the responses, all without overwhelming you with, technical jargon or too many details.
Yeah, cutting through the noise.
Exactly. Get ready for some, I think, surprising connections and maybe those aha moments that help make complex issues click.
Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with the big picture. The DHS 2025 Homeland Threat Assessment. What struck you as the most significant takeaway from that document?
Well, the key finding is, pretty unequivocally, that the terrorism threat environment within the United States is anticipated to remain at a high level right through the coming year.
High level. Not just a blip, then.
No, this isn't projected as some temporary spike. It's really an assessment of a sustained period of elevated risk.
So the threat stays high. What makes this sustained level of concern particularly noteworthy now compared to, say, 5 or 10 years ago? Is something different?
That's a crucial question, because while the intent of groups like, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, that's been a long-standing issue, right?
Right.
What seems to have shifted is maybe the proliferation of extremist ideologies online, and importantly, the increasing polarization within our own society. The DHS specifically flags the 2024 election cycle because these existing vulnerabilities, they can be easily exploited and amplified during periods of heightened social tension.
Makes sense.
So it's less about entirely new threats just popping up and more about existing threats finding, fertile ground in the current environment.
Okay.
And then you layer on top of that ongoing international conflicts like the Israel-Hamas situation. That provides another potential catalyst for radicalization and violence right here at home.
Wow.
What's particularly concerning this time, I think, is the intersection of these factors. So domestic polarization around the election might amplify the impact of international events on certain individuals, creating a more volatile threat landscape than if these were just isolated issues.
Yeah, it's a sobering thought how these internal and external pressures can kind of converge and heighten the risk.
Mm-hmm.
The assessment also highlighted the continued significant threat from lone offenders and small groups. Why is that such a persistent concern?
Well, these individuals and these small, maybe loosely affiliated groups, they're particularly challenging for law enforcement and intelligence agencies.
How so?
Because their radicalization pathways and their operational planning can be more diffuse, sort of harder to detect than those of larger, more structured organizations.
Right, less obvious.
Exactly. They often act independently or in very small cells, leaving fewer digital footprints, maybe fewer opportunities for traditional surveillance. It just makes prevention a much more complex undertaking.
And what about the more established foreign terrorist organizations, like ISIS and Al-Qaeda?
Yeah.
Have they become less of a concern with all this focus on lone actors?
Not at all, no. While the immediate threat from lone actors and small groups might seem more pronounced sometimes, the DHS assessment really emphasizes that these foreign terrorist organizations, like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, they still maintain the intent to conduct or inspire attacks right here in the United States. Their global reach, their sophisticated propaganda efforts, they continue to pose a significant, albeit perhaps less immediately visible, threat to Homeland Security.
This paints a concerning backdrop. Now, let's zoom in on those specific events in Michigan that have brought these threats into sharper focus. The foiled attack plot. Can you tell us about the individual involved?
Yeah, so we're talking about Ammar Abdulmajid-Mohamed. He's 19 years old, and he was a former member of the Michigan Army National Guard.
Former military?
Exactly. And that prior military affiliation immediately raises serious concerns about insider threats and, the potential for individuals with military training to be radicalized.
And what were the actual charges brought against him? They sound really serious.
They are. He's been charged with attempting to provide material support to a foreign terrorist organization, in this case, ISIS, and also with distributing information related to a destructive device.
Okay, both federal offenses.
Yes, and both carry substantial prison sentences if he's convicted.
He's charged with attempting to provide material support. For someone, unfamiliar with that term in legal context, what does that actually mean? What does it entail?
Basically, it means knowingly providing resources or assistance that could help a terrorist organization.
Okay.
And this can take many forms. It could be money, it could be weapons, like we saw here with the ammunition and magazines, or it could be offering training, personnel, even just logistical support or sharing information. It's quite broad.
And the target of this planned attack was a military facility here in Michigan, right?
That's correct. The intended target was the U.S. Army's Tank-Automotive and Armaments Command, TACOM facility. It's part of the Detroit Arsenal, located in Warren, Michigan.
And TACOM is important.
Oh, yes. It's a vital research and development center for the Army's ground combat systems. So an attack there could have had, significant repercussions.
How did law enforcement actually uncover this plot? It sounds like a potentially devastating event was thankfully averted.
Yes, absolutely. It seems it was thanks to the diligent work of undercover law enforcement officers.
Undercover.
Said reportedly shared his detailed plan conducting a mass shooting at TACOM with 2 undercover officers. He apparently stated his intention to carry out the attack on behalf of ISIS.
Wow. And the officers.
These officers indicated they were willing to proceed under ISIS's direction, which then led said to begin providing them with material assistance starting back in April of 2025.
So it wasn't just talk. He was actively taking steps to facilitate this attack. What kind of material assistance did he allegedly provide?
Well, according to the criminal complaint, said provided the undercover officers with armor-piercing ammunition and high-capacity magazines.
Okay.
He also conducted drone reconnaissance over the TACOM facility, essentially mapping out potential entry points, identifying target buildings.
So surveillance.
Yes. And furthermore, he apparently provided firearms training and even instructed them on how to construct Molotov cocktails. He offered specific tactical advice, too, like recommending they have about 7 magazines of ammunition ready to go.
That's a chilling level of preparation and detail. When was he finally taken into custody?
Said was arrested on May 13th, 2025. And disturbingly, this was the very day he had apparently planned to carry out the attack.
The day of.
The day of. He was apprehended near the TACOM facility right after launching his drone, seemingly, in support of the attack plan he'd laid out.
The Justice Department's statement included a particularly disturbing quote attributed to Said about the planned attack. Can you share that?
Yes. The complaint detailed that Said allegedly told the undercover officers that the planned attack was a one-way entrance.
A one-way entrance. That sends a shiver down your spine, doesn't it?
It really does. It underscores the level of radicalization and the deadly intent involved here.
Beyond these actions directly related to the planned attack, was there any other evidence linking him to extremist ideologies? Anything else found?
Absolutely. A search of Said's electronic devices, his phone and so on, revealed Facebook messages going back to October 2023, where he expressed a desire for jihad.
Okay.
He was also found to be a member of multiple Telegram channels that featured ISIS flags, propaganda videos, and other extremist content. So that further solidified his connection to the terrorist group's ideology.
And what are the potential legal ramifications if he is convicted on these pretty serious charges?
Well, he faces significant penalties. Each of the 2 counts he's charged with attempting to provide material support to ISIS and distributing info related to a destructive device each carries a maximum sentence of up to 20 years in prison.
20 years per count. Wow. Yeah. It's clear this was a significant threat that was thankfully intercepted. Who are the key agencies involved in, uncovering and preventing this attack?
It was definitely a coordinated effort, multiple agencies. The FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, the JTTF, was the lead investigative body. And they worked in close collaboration with the U.S. Army Counterintelligence Command. The prosecution itself is being handled by the Department of Justice's National Security Division and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Michigan.
Right. And Brigadier General Rhett R. Cox from Army Counterintelligence, he issued a statement about this case that's worth noting, didn't he?
He did, yes. He described Said's arrest as a sobering reminder of the importance of our counterintelligence efforts in identifying and disrupting individuals who seek to harm the nation.
Sobering indeed.
And given Said's former military status, he specifically emphasized the critical need to remain vigilant against insider threats within the armed forces.
Yeah.
Which really highlights a particularly concerning dimension of this case and, the ongoing efforts to safeguard our military from these kinds of vulnerabilities.
This foiled plot in Michigan really provides a stark illustration of those terrorism concerns outlined in the DHS threat assessment.
It really does.
Let's broaden our focus now, maybe touch on some of these other homeland security threats mentioned in the report and see how they might also connect back to events here in Michigan. One area of concern highlighted was foreign influence and espionage.
Yes. The DHS assessment anticipates that state actors will continue to employ various sort of subversive tactics aimed at sowing discord and undermining trust in U.S. institutions.
How so?
They specifically mention targeting minority communities, political dissidents, and journalists as part of these influence operations.
And this brings to mind an incident that also occurred in Michigan involving Chinese nationals near Camp Grayling back in the summer of 2023. Can you walk us through what happened there?
Certainly. So 5 Chinese nationals who were identified at the time as University of Michigan students, they were encountered near a lake just outside Camp Grayling. That's a National Guard training facility up in northern Michigan.
Right.
It was late at night, and they were approached by a National Guard sergeant major. When he questioned them, they initially identified themselves as media and said they were there to observe shooting stars.
Shooting stars.
Yeah.
Near a military base late at night. That explanation does seem, well, rather improbable.
It raised eyebrows, certainly.
What did this subsequent investigation reveal?
Well, the FBI investigation found that these individuals had booked a motel room near Camp Grayling about a week before this encounter.
Okay.
And during a later interview, this was at the Detroit airport, one of the individuals repeated the shooting stars explanation. However, a search of his electronic devices turned up images of military vehicles.
Ah.
And these images were taken on the same night they were stopped by the National Guard. The FBI also noted there's sort of a historical pattern of Chinese college students photographing sensitive defense sites in the U.S.
Right. But it's important to clarify, though, that they weren't ultimately charged with espionage itself, correct?
Yeah. That's absolutely correct. The charges filed against them were for lying to federal investigators and conspiring to clear their phones of photos.
Okay. Obstruction, basically.
Essentially, yes. While those charges are serious, they don't directly address the question of espionage. The legal case focused on their alleged attempts to obstruct the investigation, not the underlying intent necessarily.
This incident sparked quite a bit of debate and speculation. As you mentioned, there was a Reddit discussion about it. What were some of the different viewpoints being expressed there? What did people think?
Oh, the Reddit discussion really showcased the whole spectrum of public opinion on incidents like this. You had some users expressing significant suspicion, viewing it as a pretty clear case of attempted espionage, referencing past instances of, individuals from other nations being caught near military installations. Then you had others who were more cautious, suggesting the students might have had innocent intentions. Maybe they were genuinely interested in stargazing near a somewhat remote area, or perhaps they just panicked when confronted by military personnel. Plausible, maybe.
And there were even some more humorous takes, with users questioning what top-secret information could possibly be gleaned near Camp Grayling,
Yeah, right.
It really highlighted the difficulty in definitively interpreting intent in these situations and just the diverse ways people assess potential national security risks.
Yeah, definitely shades of gray there. Okay, so beyond the threats of terrorism and foreign influence, the DHS assessment also underscored the ongoing vulnerability of critical infrastructure.
Yes, this remains a significant area of concern. The assessment anticipates continued attempts to target our nation's critical infrastructure, things like energy, communications, transportation, through both cyber attacks and physical sabotage.
And who's doing the targeting?
They specifically identified the People's Republic of China, Russia, and Iran as the most significant foreign state actors posing threats in this domain.
Right. And what about other types of threats that fall under the Homeland Security umbrella, like, say, the flow of illegal drugs? Yeah, the lethal threat posed by illegal drugs, particularly fentanyl, was definitely highlighted. The DHS detailed their ongoing efforts to combat drug trafficking, including significant seizures of fentanyl.
Any good news there?
They did point to a recent decrease in overdose deaths as a positive indicator, which is welcome news. However, they emphasized that fentanyl continues to represent a major national security and public health challenge. It's far from over.
It's evident the government is actively engaged in a pretty wide range of efforts to counter these diverse threats. Can you briefly outline some of the proactive measures being taken by DHS and the DOJ?
Sure. There's really a comprehensive, multi-layered strategy in place. This includes things like enhanced screening and vetting procedures, especially at borders and ports of entry,
Okay.
increased and more rapid intelligence sharing among federal, state, and local agencies, and also with international partners. That's crucial. And there are a variety of prevention programs aimed at countering violent extremism and online radicalization.
We saw that work in Michigan.
Exactly. The successful disruption of the attack plot in Michigan is a tangible example of these efforts in action, particularly the use of undercover operations and that close collaboration between the FBI and Army counterintelligence.
Right.
And we also saw another successful prosecution in Michigan back in 2023, the conviction of Ibrahim Izimi Saibli for providing material support to ISIS and attending a terrorist training camp. That underscores the DOJ's commitment to holding individuals accountable.
Okay.
Plus, DHS uses agencies like CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, to strengthen cybersecurity and physical security of critical infrastructure. And they provide grant funding to support local community-based prevention initiatives and enhance security for nonprofits that might be at increased risk.
This has been a truly insightful look at some of the most pressing homeland security challenges we face, especially as they've, shown up right here in Michigan. To bring our discussion toward a close, what are the key takeaways you'd really like our listeners to remember from all this?
Okay. I think firstly, the threat of terrorism, whether it's inspired by foreign groups like ISIS or potentially arising from domestic extremism, it remains a persistent and significant concern. The foiled plot in Michigan demonstrates that powerfully.
Right.
Secondly, we need to remain aware of the ongoing risks associated with foreign influence and potential espionage, even in cases where the ultimate intent isn't immediately clear, like that incident near Camp Grayling illustrated. And finally, I'd say the dedicated and collaborative work of our law enforcement and intelligence agencies is just absolutely vital in identifying, disrupting, and ultimately preventing these threats from actually materializing.
You certainly provided a great deal of clarity on some complex issues. It's clearly a multifaceted landscape, threats coming from various sources, both domestic and international.
It is.
So, considering the continuous nature of these threats and their diverse origins, what's a final thought you'd leave our listeners with? Something for them to maybe ponder on their own.
Well, given the complexities we've explored this enduring threat of terrorism, the often less defined but still concerning issue of foreign influence, maybe the question to ponder is this. What are the most effective ways for individuals and communities like yours to stay informed and contribute to overall security, but without succumbing to fear or, importantly, misinformation?
That's a good one.
It's really a question of cultivating both vigilance and critical thinking in a world where information and sometimes disinformation is just so readily available. How do you strike that balance?